transmission, but with a proviso based on connectivity. But let's take a listen to Senator Monguno and the decision of the Senate.
This amendment that is sought is to bring our laws that we are making, is to make it autonomous, to make it a replica of the wishes and aspirations of the people. The amendment I'm proposing... Go ahead with it. Huh? That is the motion. That the presiding officer... The presiding officer shall electronically transmit the results from each polling unit to IREP portal, and such transmission shall be done after the prescribed form EC8A has been signed and stamped by the presiding officer and or countersigned by the candidates or polling agents where available at the polling unit, provided that if the electronic transmission of the result fails as a result of communication failure and it becomes impossible to transmit in form EC8A, signed and stamped by the presiding officer and or countersigned by the candidates or polling agents where available at the polling unit, the form EC8A shall, in such a case, be the primary source of correlation and declaration of results. That is the amendment sought to be made in this motion.
Those in support of the motion as enunciated by Senator Monguno and seconded by Senator Bamoro say aye. Aye. And those again say nay. Nay. The ayes have it.
So that's the decision of the Senate. My guest is going to give his own position, or the party's position. That's the National Publicity Secretary of the People's Democratic Party, Comrade Ememobong, joins us from our Abuja studio. Comrade Ememobong, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Good afternoon. Glad to be here again, Jeff.
Just before I throw in my first question, based on the release I saw from your end, let me show Nigerians what happened. So there are two versions of the Electoral Act amendment. The Senate and the House will pass a version, and the conference committee that will harmonize a different position have been constituted, 12 each.
I can't hear you.
No, I'm coming to you in just a moment, if you can just hold on for a moment. So I'm just trying to intimate the audience on this one. So let's go to the position of the House of Reps. That is the other one. Oh dear. Okay. So this is the version of the House of Reps. Clause 63, which was presented by the committee. It says the commission shall electronically transmit the results from each polling unit to IREP portal in real time, and such transmission shall be done simultaneously with the physical collation of results. This is what a lot of people are advocating for. This is the position of the House of Reps. Now let's go to what the Senate rescinded and adopted yesterday. So this first part says the presiding officer shall electronically transmit the results from each polling unit to IREP portal, and such transmission shall be done after the prescribed form EC8A has been signed and stamped by the presiding officer and or countersigned by the candidate or polling agents where available at the polling units. We'll go to the next one on this slide. Let's get to see what it says. Provided that if the electronic transmission of results fail as a result of the communication failure, it becomes impossible to transmit the result electronically in the form EC8A signed and stamped by the presiding officer and or countersigned by the candidates or polling agents where available at the polling unit. The form EC8A shall, in such case, be the primary source of collation and declaration of results. Okay, so I just needed people to, because not everybody may have heard what Senator Monguno said. Comrade Ini, your position is that your release says the Senate is being clever by half. What do you mean?
Well, certainly when you listen to the prologue before the senator made the amendments, he said they were compelled by the circumstance to align their laws with the wishes of Nigerians. But the amendment now doesn't align with that, because clearly this has been going on for 2 years. A multiple stakeholder engagement has brought this, several reports, several engagement, political parties, INEC themselves engaging, and civil society organizations. And I'm sure that within these 2 years, all of the senators would have had constituency briefings with their people and would have asked, because if there is any legislation that all of Nigerians are very interested in is this particular legislation. And a cursory look into the composition of their constituencies would have shown that Nigerians want real-time, their constituents want real-time electronic transmission of results. Now, if you juxtapose both what the House of Representatives passed and what the Senate passed, you would now see that clearly the Senate, there's something some senators are afraid of, and which is why where we left it off the last time to say, what are they afraid of? Now, when you look at the principles of legislative drafting, you would see that the simpler the legislation in ordinary language, the better. So when you look at the version passed by the House of Representatives, which is the version that the multiple stakeholder group had agreed to, which is the versions Nigerians are insisting on, you would see clearly that that is easier to interpret without any mischief, because the devil is usually in the details. And so now, the same beavers machine that is used for accreditation all through the elections, from opening of polls to closing of polls, is the same beavers that will be unable. Why is there an anticipation that these beavers would not be able to capture a document in kilobytes and transmit? Clearly, why the anticipation of failure? Laws are made to cover the field. Exceptions are created to aid, not to defeat the general position. We posit that the being clever by half is that this exception is made to defeat this. And clearly you recall that in 2015, something of this nature happened through an INEC guideline, where INEC had said, we are introducing the electronic card reader machine, but where the card reader is not working, that you can use incident form. Remember that some states had an issue where 80% to 90% incident forms were used. So we are saying that you cannot introduce a proviso to defeat the purpose of the main law. Then it will clearly be showing, it will be reiterating the hesitation, the initial hesitation of the Senate to have passed the bill as it came from their own committee. They set up a general committee that went around the entire country. They came back and set up another ad hoc committee that still went and returned the same verdict. So the question is, what are people afraid of? And it goes to show that if you go again, if you backtrack to the political history of some of the people who are opposed to this, you're going to see that they have either escaped by hair's breadth because results were not electronically transferred, or they have been defeated because a beavers machine had prevented them from rigging elections. So the question is, in terms of legislature, the legislators must remember that they are representatives of people. Now, the word representation means you are mirroring. And again, there's a concept of mirror representation, which means that the desires of majority of the constituents of your place must be what you reflect on the National Assembly, not your own. Because irrespective of the fact that you are the only person speaking for the constituency, you are supposed to be the amalgamation. You're supposed to be like a speaker, not the microphone. The people who hold the microphone, they speak into the microphone, you echo what they speak. So the majority voices of the representatives or of the represented in your constituency is meant to be your position on that. And so we are completely at a loss how you make a proviso whose intention, even from the way you're reading, even from the way it's presented, is to defeat the main clause. Because it clearly gives wide discretionary powers to a presiding officer. And we have seen as we speak today, there are some state elections where some of the people who are involved in this were dramatis personae in those elections, where you see that the result on IREV is clearly different from the result on the Form ECAA. And now the question is, the provision in sub 1 and 2 already makes provision for manual. No one is extricating manual transmission, no. But we are saying that the electronic transmission should be done real time. Send it at that point. Immediately you send it, it will go. Then when you get to collation, you compare what was sent and what was not. So people would, and they are now creating a situation where people will go to court to say, look, as at the time it was sent, there was a glitch, which is why we relied on even a mutilated ECAA. It doesn't help for elections. Our laws must be progressive, not retrogressive.
Mr. Ememobong, so let's talk about some things that we've noticed with this, background. Right now, it's in the hands of 24 persons, both from both chambers, who harmonize the position, whether or not to take the shorter in your words, simpler House of Reps version that captured real time and all of the elements and there are arguments to that as well. And then this Senate part that captured a longer, more words in itself, that arguments to that effect. So from what we know about the beavers, and I want you to help us understand how to navigate this part because we must talk solutions now. From what we know about the beavers was designed with the understanding that there is possibility of lack of network. So the beavers doesn't require internet network for accreditation. The beavers doesn't require internet network for capture. It only requires internet network for transfer because it has to go through cloud. So with what I've seen the Senate do, I don't know whether it's a mix-up. Maybe you can help interpret it for us. Collation is still manual. Collation of results will still remain manual. What the argument is transmission
Absolutely.
of ECHA onto IRF to deepen confidence in the system, and so that before we get to collation center, at least we have seen it for the places that have network. Do you think they are mixing things up or they are creating room for, I don't know. What do you make of it?
I think it's intention being masked as ignorance. Because in the places, I heard someone say that, admit shamefully that there are 9 states in this country where insecurity has happened and there are no network connectivity. So clearly, and which beats logic, because in those places, banks are still operating. In those places where even they've admitted that they've surrendered to insecurity, you see that the terrorists are even tweeting videos, not text messages, from their places and requiring a ransom. So clearly this is ill intention masked as ignorance. But the clear truth is that politicians would always be politicians who think of the next election. But there is a time where politicians must transit from being politicians to being statespeople, statesmen, stateswomen, and they look at the next generation. And all of us have agreed that democracy is the best form of governance. And so what we ought to do in our political engagement is to ensure that we entrench, we deepen, faith in the process. Remember that the last election had voter apathy. And when you have over 250 million people, you have 90 million people registered to vote, and you have only 26 to 27% of that population coming to choose who a leader is, it begins to give legitimacy crisis. You win an election, but you're a stranger to the people. You begin to struggle from point 1 of that election. And out of the 26%, you still have someone scoring less than 40% to emerge as president. So what should we do now? What we should do now is to adopt the disposition that the Jonathan era adopted. Yes, there were fears that, there were even valid fears that 2 weeks to that election, ballot materials were not printed, the electronic card reader was not available. But Jonathan, being a statesman, said, we put the country over and above politics. And what that meant is, this would give more people confidence to come out to vote. And if Nigerians across the board are insisting that this is what we want, the beavers machine, it's just take it like your phone. If I send you a text message now and there is no internet, or a WhatsApp message, there is no internet, what does the WhatsApp message do? It leaves my phone, meaning I can no longer manipulate it. I cannot edit it until internet comes on. At any point where there is even 2G internet, it will now transmit to the IRF, and everyone will be able to have that. And now that it has legal parentage, it means that it will be admissible in court. When you double down to say that where there is a glitch, why do you anticipate a glitch? Why don't you anticipate a glitch at the point of accreditation? Because you have electronic accreditation, you have manual voting, you have electronic transmission, you have manual collation. There's still the admixture. And this electronic transmission is a second level confirmation of manual, because the presiding officer is still going to go to the ward collation center with his paper. So it's an admixture of both manual and electronic. So why anticipate the glitch? So the issue is that clearly we must, and the people who should complain, I remember that David Mark gave an admonition, Senator David Mark gave an admonition and said, do not speak for INEC. Do your work as the legislature. Let the INEC people say what they want to do. And if you go back a little, backtrack a little to the last 3 cycles of elections, you're going to see that both the card reader and the beavers have been working excellently more than 90% of the polling units. I mean, so if you have 90% in any examination, it's not just A, it's A+. And there is absolutely no logical basis for the opposition to real-time electronic transmission. You see, all of the stories we're trying to make excuses where there are none.
All right, so let's talk about data that is available to us. I know that when NCC and INEC, I think in 2018 also, were building up to this electronic transmission, they had alluded to the fact that 93% of their polling unit, this is INEC speaking now, had internet connection, whether it's 1, 2, whatever G you want to call it, and they will provide for GSM backup or something of that nature for the 7%. In the last election, network issues was about 16,000 polling units out of the 176,000 polling units. So we're talking about 9%, which is a good number in terms of coverage. It's not perfect, but it's a good number. Where I'm going to is the next question, and it's a valid question because of terminology, debate, and all of that. Now, the notoriety of post-election litigation lends credence to the distrust and what you call imperfection in our election result system carried out by INEC, which is why that debate around real time. So if my producer can put up the version of the House of Reps, let's talk about real time. You're a lawyer, you've been in courts, and you've seen these things being debated. The argument is that word, real time. The framers perhaps are saying as soon as this election is conducted, snap and send. Some are saying network issue. How do we navigate in real time if this particular version is adopted?
Now, the clear issue about real time is a statement of fact. So, for example, you do know there are polling units that have more than 500. There are polling units that have less than 500. So they cannot conclude the processes at the same time. Real time would be, that which is why there are people there. Real time would be at the conclusion. The procedure in the guidelines, a community reading of the guidelines and the Electoral Act would show that when you finish, you sort the ballot, you count the ballot, you record the ballot, and you sign. In the presence of the agents, and they also sign. You give a copy to the agents who are available. You give a copy to security. Then the next thing. So why are we not quarreling with the other manual processes? Now, immediately you conclude that snap and transmit real time, your own real time. And when we get to court, it will be a statement of fact where the presiding officer or the agents will have to give evidence to what real time was. So real time in my village may not be real time in Jeff's village, may not be real time in another person, but it is real time transmission as at the conclusion. So we're not talking of universal real time. I mean, even the time here is not the same time in the US. In the US alone, you have different time zones. But does that mean that 1 p.m. in Texas, you know, in court, will not also be 1 p.m. in Georgia? It will be their 1 p.m., the 1 p.m. of Georgia, the 1 p.m. of New York, the 1 p.m. So it is, I mean, it beats my imagination that this kind of pedestrian excuses are being made, which goes again to express the fear that people have about the sanctity of the ballot. Submit yourselves. People say they are very popular. Submit yourselves to the will of the people. And which is what will lead us to being responsible to the people who have elected us. Because real time in my village will be when we conclude. You know, you remember that people have boasted that elections will be returned 3 hours after. That is why people are afraid of real time. Because if you return elections 3 hours after, people will see the result, and it is transmitted real time. People will see the result that you ended the poll before the regulated time. So there is an admixture. Remember that a lot of people have complained that election rigging has now left the polling unit, so that when people vote, between the polling unit and the collation center, a lot happens. So you get to a point where a particular set of people take over a collation center, and what happens there is not known. They don't allow agents of other parties to come in there. And so they change the whole thing, and the simple thing is they tell you, go to court. And when you go to court, they say, well, they bring the form ECAA, which some may have been rewritten at that point. And so the agents of the other party was not there.
Let's talk about one layer as we begin to wrap up. There's also, I don't know how much of the firewalls we have, and this brings to I used that word this morning, and there was a back and forth. But what I was trying to say was that the 2023 had a traumatic effect on both the elected and the electorate. How does it affect the elected? We saw the sweeping loss for especially members of the legislature across, whether subnational, no, not subnational, not the National Assembly. So we saw that loss, unprecedented in a very long time. In fact, we dare to say that if that election had taken place, the governorship election had taken place on that same day, a lot of governors would have lost their election. But on the electorate side is the issue of the presidential election result that came way, the next day before we started seeing results towards the evening, and INEC was not talking to anyone. So that is a trauma on both sides. So in your view, as somebody in the opposition, what is the opposition going to do to navigate this? Because now everything is left to the hands of the lawmakers. There are 12 people on each side that will make a decision. Is there a movement behind the scene to see what position will be taken? Because it appears the opposition wants, like other citizens, to want the issue of real-time that has been touted. This real-time started with Mahmoud Yakubu. And then let's also talk about the protection of votes when it's uploaded to IREV in terms of the argument about hacking. And that argument, because if it was electronic voting, maybe, but this is electronic results being uploaded. Help us navigate it, if you get my drift.
Yeah, I do get your drift. So let's start from the fear of AI, of hacking. I mean, again, it just shows that a lot of ignorance is in the room. Yes, so what we are saying is, it's not about votes. We're not talking about electronic voting. We're talking about electronic transmission of a fiscal document that had been done. So I also do know that at the point, mischief makers would try to attempt to hack that. But that's why the CBN is online. That's why all our banks are still online. And they have firewalls. While we agree that none of which is totally foolproof, but it would take a lot of money and a lot of ingenuity to be able to hack through that and get that done. That out of the way. Now, when you go to the import of what the 2023 elections did, you clearly stated something. You finish elections and the whole country is in the dark. So what this would do, it will continue to lead to death and carnage because people will keep going to polling units with petrol and matches. Because they finish that and they say, look, presiding officer, we're following you to wherever you're going to prevent. They say, no, and it can be very...
For a tasty meal, do not compromise. Choose Gold.
Use Terra Gold for the rich, consistent taste your loved ones crave for. Good for soups, stews, and jollof. Terra Gold. 1 cube, endless possibilities.
They just wait and call the collation agent to say, check IREV, you see it. And at that point, it reduces. What we need to do is to reduce human intervention in these processes. And we are hoping that when we are done with this transmission, we can begin to now think of electronic voting and the rest, because we must deepen this. When you see that NCC, which is in charge of communication, and if you even see the data you brought from INEC about internet penetration, then the argument falls flat, because if that was in 2023 and you had 9% only downtime in places, 9% of the polling unit downtime, you can imagine with fintech happening, almost everyone having money points, OP and the rest. Recently, I was on the high sea heading to Nembe, and I was shocked that we had network all through on the high sea till we got to Nembe, meaning that people buy fish. I saw people staying on top of the high sea to transact, with POS and stuff on the high sea, buying fish from boat to boat, and that's the high sea. And so, at the point we are, the data, the logic doesn't support what the Senate has done. But unfortunately, like you heard, it was a voice vote. So, and depending on how you heard it, you could think that the nays had it or the EAs have it. But that is the discretion of the presiding officer as to what he heard. And what is in our head can determine what we hear.
All right, Comrade Ini, we'll now wait for what plays out at the conference committee. Who wins this? Whether it's the Senate...
we're mounting a lot of pressure on the members of the conference committee too, as the opposition. We are coming together. It's going to be a full opposition disposition to that. Atiku said it the other time. Turaki has also said it. Peter Obi has said it. The national opposition movement is clearly also galvanizing along that line. So we are going to put up a very strong fight so that we determine whether this election is good for us to attend to. If the people don't want, they will allow them to have their elections, elect themselves and go. But if we must participate, then it must be credible enough. And again, the Senate must be careful so that they don't start the discussion as to whether we should have a unicameral legislature. Because if a legislative house begins to act in a way that is in deviance towards the people who send them, then people may begin to ask, this bicameral legislature, how good has it done us?
All right, fantastic. We'll continue to keep tab. Our job is to report on all sides. Those who are for, those who are against, so we'll continue to look. And there are so many other things that are differences from the Senate version to the House of Reps version. that we have been blindsided because of this electronic transmission, which looks like the main highlights and the crown of it all. But I want to thank you, Comrade Ememobong is the National Publicity Secretary of the People's Democratic Party. Thank you, sir, for coming on the program.
Thank you very much.
And that's it on the program. Thank you for your time and company. I'm Jeffrey Uzama. You've been served on Lunchtime Politics. Bye-bye.